Go ahead, yes.
Sorry about that. Also, before we get started, if you would please, as you may speak today, please make sure your microphone is on. We have some people on that are calling in, and without the microphone, they can't hear. So with that said, Ms. Malo, could you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Colleen, would you like to lead us, please?
So I think luckily I don't normally stand up here, but today is my once-a-year day now that Deb Pruitt has retired, that I will give the board a bit of history on the Pinellas Core Management Services, Inc. board. Pinellas Core Management Services, PCMS, as you guys may hear that term, is a 501c3, and it is treated as a component unit of JWB. So JWB is the independent special district, but it also has a 501c3. The history of PCMS is interesting. It's changed dramatically over the years. It was created in 1999 as the Neighborhood Family Centers Coalition, which was originally contemplated for the NFCs to pool resources so that they could be more efficient and sort of help them all operate consistently. The NFCs hired an executive director to operate the NFCC, and in early 2008, there was a name change to PCMS. So at that point in time, there was an operational change. PCMS operated outside of JWB. They had a new executive director, and that person worked with the NFCs. But at that point, a little bit later, between 2009 and 2010, it was brought back in-house to JWB, and then it subsequently contracted directly with the NFCs. At that point, there was minimal use for PCMS other than wrapping up some contracts. There were some grants, some other things that PCMS had that JWB wrapped up back in that time frame. So right now, PCMS stated mission is to receive and administer federal, state, and local grants and other funds, and administer programs or pass through the funding to other 501c3 organizations in the core services area of parental support and skills training, family literacy, economic development, child development, outreach, and other activities to benefit low-income families and individuals in Pinellas. The board determined it was reasonable and prudent to maintain the 501c3 if in the future we could secure grant funding that required submission via nonprofits. Utilization in the past 5 years of PCMS has at one point, several years ago, not the past year, but Ms. Brock will speak to this, it would require the Child Care Purchasing Pool state match for ELC under the Child Care Executive Partnership. Current utilization is fairly minimum. I believe in the past couple years there's been some funding from the Foundation for Healthy St. Pete related to the mental health initiative. So while we're here today, we have our annual meeting. Once per year we are required under state law to meet, and because this is our every 2-year meeting where we have to have PCMS appoint the officers. Historically, we have presented a slate of officers because all of the JWB board members, unless there's a conflict, sit on the PCMS board. And we have historically had the chair of the board be the chair of PCMS. The treasurer of PCMS is typically the vice chair of the board. And the secretary of PCMS is typically the secretary of the JWB board. So our first action item would be the appointment of the officers of PCMS for the next 2 years. And I have listed that slate. Of course, you all are free to change that as you see fit, but that is our historical slate. And then after that, we will, whoever is appointed the chair can take over and handle the rest of the business that PCMS needs to do annually. So I would entertain a motion to appoint the officers of PCMS.
Motion to approve.
And we have a motion by Mr. Bartlett and a second by Ms. Ralston. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I heard, any objection? No objections. Mr. McCurrick, you are the chair of PCMS for the next 2 years, and I will hand over the meeting to you.
Thank you, Colleen, I appreciate that. The next action item is the approval of a new PCMS board member, Commissioner Pat Gerard. At this time, I call for the approval of one new PCMS board member who recently joined JWB board in January 22. The Honorable Pat Gerard was elected to the Pinellas County Board of Commissioners in 2014. She previously served on the Largo City Commission from 2000 to 2014. The last 8 years as its mayor. Commissioner Gerard has dedicated her career to human services, working with victims of assault, domestic violence, and homelessness. Commissioner Gerard serves as ex officio capacity on JWB board and requires an official action to approve to be served on the PCMS board. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Congratulations, Honorable Pat Gerard. Okay, next segment of the business is the approval of the minutes from April 2018. I'm sorry, April 8th, 2021. Assuming all have read those, do I have a motion to approve?
So move.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? One motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. Next action item is to review the PCMS 2020 and 2021 990 tax forms. Laura, could you please lead us through that?
Thank you. Good morning. So as Colleen mentioned, since this legal entity is a 501c3 nonprofit, it's required to file a 990 tax return on an annual basis. The tax returns are always the year that the fiscal year begins. So we're filing the 2020 tax return, which is for the fiscal year 2020 through 2021. We are also required to provide a copy of the 990 to all the board members, and that's one of the questions on the tax return that we check off that said this was provided to the board members. So here is the opportunity for you to review that, and it reports the activity relative to the past year. And you can see we've got the revenues, the nominal amount that Colleen had indicated, as well as the expenses. And it breaks out the expenses between program-related expense and administrative expenses. And if there's any questions regarding that, I don't believe, Colleen, there's any action item that's required.
I think they typically accept the 990 so that you can file it.
Thank you. Then
So do I have a motion to accept the 990s?
Motion to accept the 990 for PCMS?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Commissioner Gerard was the second. Any comments or concerns? Hearing none. With a motion and a second. For a vote, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. They've been approved. The next are information items. FY21 statement and the PCMS bylaws. Does anyone want to review or have any comments or questions about those?
I mainly attached those in case, especially our new member wanted to read those.
Okay. Seeing none, I motion to adjourn this meeting. I've lost my, bear with me as I get to my agenda. Okay. I'm now calling to order the board meeting of Thursday, March 20, oh, no, I'm sorry, of April the 14th. Here we go. I'm kind of, for some reason, missing that. There we go. Consent items, approval of the minutes, and acceptance of the financial report from February 2022. Do I have a motion to approve?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Action item A3, approve the exception of board policy on stipends for respite programs. Karen Boger, can you hear me?
Hello, good morning. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Just wanted to let you all know, Karen is not well, and she tested positive for the flu. So she's willing to do this via phone, but that's why she's not in the room.
So, yes, good morning, everyone. Karen Boges, Chief Program Officer. So I have first up action item 3A and I'll read the recommended action again, approve exception to board policy on stipends for respite program requests for proposals. And, well-designed and implemented respite programs support families and provide effective strategies to strengthen families and prevent child abuse and neglect. JWB staff have researched national best practices and incorporated into the design of the respite RFP, including a comprehensive approach developing both informal and formal support systems to be in place well beyond the end of respite services. Certain potential respite providers are part of a family's trusted support system, but are not employees of the respite program, and should be compensated for stepping up during a very stressful time for families. And family-selected caregivers would be trained, screened, and supervised accordingly. National models also consider this approach and have been included in the memo. JWB staff are requesting approval of this exception for a respite program to better support family voice, choice, and engagement in respite services. And I did want to note that I know this week signed into legislation 7034 was enhanced financial support for families and non-family caregivers stepping up for children in need to prevent families from further entering or children from further entering the child welfare system. And I know Beth has been monitoring that and can speak further to that, but I wanted to open up for any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve? I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion's approved. Action item B, approval and release of solicitation for new strategically aligned programs. Laura, could you please lead us through that?
Or,
I believe Karen's
Or
going
Karen's
to,
gonna do
Karen's
that
going
as
to
Karen's
well?
speak
going
to
to take
that.
the lead, and
Okay.
Thank you.
Laurel will back her up.
All right, Karen, you're up again.
Okay, so this is the LOI and RFP process for school readiness and school success results areas. And the investment is up to $2.75 million. Applicants can submit up to 2 requests and must be a minimum of $100,000 per request. This is for new programming only and not for existing programming. There are 2 phases to this process, and as you can see on the screen, the first phase of the process is the LOI timeline. If approved today, it would be released tomorrow, Friday, April 15th. And this phase allows for screening of applications and a selection for respondents to move to phase 2. And this would occur at the end of August. And Shannon, you can move to the next slide, please. Phase 2 begins at the end of September 2022, and you'll see that there is about 6 weeks in between, and this really allows for further requirements to be developed for the RFP phase, as well as for those moving forward in the process to think more in-depthly about their programming and how it can be successfully implemented. And a good example I can use of this is if a program needs to meet Pinellas County Licensing Board requirements, they would need to consider that in any proposal moving forward. Phase 2 awards will be announced in February of 2023, and on or before April 1st, contracts will be executed. And this will allow for programs to work on hiring, training their staff, getting sites in order, working with any schools that they may be potentially collaborating with, or other programs if necessary, and preparing for August 2023 opening, which coincides with the school year. And parents also often make decisions for the upcoming school year in the spring, so this is good timing for the programs to be able to advertise. I would like to open up for any questions at this time.
Are there any questions by the board? Seeing none? Oops, I'm sorry. Is there one? Susan,
I have
do you
no
have one?
question. I think at JWB, as other government agencies do, we use acronyms quite a bit. And it was so funny, just even me, who's been around for a long time, had to just question a couple of the acronyms. So there are other people reading these materials that are not integrated into the JWB sector. So if we can just spell it out a little bit, LOI, LOI, you guys live it every day, but just to make sure that it's clear what it is, on some of these technicalities, what we're doing.
We
Thanks.
will work on that, Ms. Ralston.
Thanks.
I completely and totally agree.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve? I have a motion. Do I have a second? I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
As opposed, same sign. The motion is approved. Moving on to four discussion items, a multi-year forecast key assumptions. Before Laura begins this, I wanted to just make a comment. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss something? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we just did that. Approval of the workforce stabilization budget amendments. Karen, you're at it again.
I know, this is my last one, my last action item for today. So approve fiscal year 22 budget amendments for $1,038,640 to 20 recommended workforce stabilization recipients. And if you remember, back in January, I had presented JWB staff efforts to address workforce shortages, turnover, and recruitment issues that have impacted our funded programs and the quality of service delivery. And as we can see across the nation, workforce shortages are impacting all of our daily lives, but even more so for our families that we serve and our agencies that we fund. We prioritize 20 programs comprising of early learning centers or out-of-school time programs in our Department of Health, Healthy Families Pinellas home visitation program. These programs have some of the lowest wages for staff. They also had to close classrooms, reduce capacity, create wait lists for families who needed the services to be able to return to work and stabilize their households. In addition, since COVID, children and families have increased needs, and we're seeing a lot of behavioral needs in children in our programs. These programs create safe, structured programming and places for children and families to go. They provide learning, academic enhancements, social emotional learning, parent education, and more. JWB staff created an application process. Providers submitted proposals. Staff teams reviewed each proposal, and the attached sheet is the recommended amount of funding being requested by each program, totaling over $1 million for the remainder of this fiscal year and annualized just over $3.2 million. These increases, a majority of them make up staff salary increases, along with professional development and training that is needed, additional staff positions, and other associated administrative and operating costs. Providers will report to JWB quarterly updates on the impact of these recruitment and retention efforts, and we can update the board accordingly. And staff are putting together a plan and timeline for the remainder of JWB programs to consider for workforce stabilization during the fiscal 23 year. I would like to open for any questions.
Are there any questions? Yes.
I don't have a question. I just want to make a comment that I think this is pretty important. If we look across the country, look across our own state, look across our own county, maintaining people is really difficult right now. And so if we don't keep our salaries and our budgets in line with what everybody else is doing in the state of Florida, we'll diminish programs just by losing people. So I think this is a really important thing that we're doing right here, and I'm definitely for it.
Any other comments or questions? Ms. Ralston?
My only comment is I appreciate staff due diligence, taking time to present these information items to us as presentations prior to today's board meeting where we're approving these items. So clearly, we know quite a bit about these three items, so it's easier for us at this point to move ahead with approval. So again, thanks to the staff for the due diligence that happened the last 6 months. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, Laura?
I just wanted to point out that we are recommending that the funds for this amendment come from the unrestricted fund balance, and a portion of it will come from the BP's Horizon Spill funds that we have been sitting on for several years. So we researched what we could use those funds for, what if there were any restrictions, and we felt like this would be a good use of those dollars to put it towards this workforce stabilization.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move approval?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Those opposed, same sign. The motion is approved. Karen, again, thank you. I hope you feel better and go get some rest.
Thank you very much.
But you're more than welcome to stay on and listen to the rest of this conversation, which is probably very important.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Let's move on to the discussion of the multi-year forecast, forecasting key assumptions. And Ms. Ralston, I think you led us in the right direction with your comment just now. This is our opportunity to really take a good hard look at what our key assumptions are for this upcoming budget year, to really get into the programs and to understand what the requests are by staff, and for us to really take a good hard look at where do we need to go from here, based on our strategy, based on the economic situations in which we're dealing with. So this is I think this is the first of a few prior to our finalization of the budget. So I ask that the board consider that and really hone in on any questions that you may have or any issues that you see may arise. With that said, oops, I'm sorry, is there a question?
I think as a follow-up, absolutely correct. I think this is typically an item that would go to Finance Committee meeting. And at our last Finance Committee meeting, when we had a very initial conversation about key assumptions, it was suggested that these come to the full board because it's vital for the board to give the staff an indication of where we're leaning with key assumptions as we prepare for the budget in '23, that these discussions are vital for the staff to be able to move forward. I think when we look at these spreadsheets and realize the numbers spread over the 5 years, we need to come to some conversation and decision-making to allow the staff to move forward. So I would suggest that the board come on up to the balcony seat and look at these key assumptions as they will roll out to the best of our ability for the next 5 years.
Thank you, Ms. Ross. Laura, would you like to lead us through this discussion?
Sure. Thank you. As mentioned earlier, we're here today to discuss and obtain feedback from the board regarding the underlying fiscal '23 key budget assumptions. We have carefully evaluated the implications of reducing the millage rate for fiscal '23, but because of the significant growth planned with the implementation of our strategic plan, with the enhanced workforce stabilization, with the continued economic volatility, and the impact on the future property values, staff recommended to the Finance Committee on February 24th, 2022, to maintain the millage rate at 0.8981. Because there are a lot of moving parts to this forecast, and with the delayed information from the county, we have provided 2 multi-year scenarios for your review. We are recalling those the most likely and the worst-case scenarios. The worst-case scenario reflects property value changes similar to those that occurred during the 2008 recession. It shows a flat millage rate, a reduction in property values beginning in fiscal '25, and an increase in millage rate to the maximum of 1.000 rate starting in fiscal '26. This would result in almost a zero expenditure growth beginning in fiscal '25 and significant cuts to begin in fiscal '26 of approximately $32 million. This would bring our unassigned fund balance down to 5%, which is below our target rate of 8.3%, which represents 1 month reserve over our 2-month reserve that we have for cash flow purposes. The most likely scenario shows a flat rate from fiscal '23 to fiscal '27. Note, at this date, we have not received the county forecast assumptions, which we normally would have at this time, and they have told us that they are moving that presentation until May of 2022. Unfortunately, we have to continue and calculate numbers and move forward, and I'm happy that we're having this discussion with you all today. What we were able to find was that the average home taxable value for fiscal '21 in Pinellas County had increased 8%, which resulted in an increase of $11 for the average home taxpayer, which increased from $146 to $157, with no change in the millage rate. Beth, Diana, and I have met on several occasions to work on these key assumptions, and I would like to highlight those with you at this time. Again, we are looking for feedback from the board in order for us to move forward with the forecast and budget to be presented at the next Finance Committee meeting, which is Thursday, April 28th. The major key assumptions, the COLAs, the cost of living adjustments. For personnel salaries, we have used a 9.6% COLA based on the local consumer price index, the CPI, for Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater area, which was the February 2022 figures. Tuesday, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the new numbers for March 22, which was an increase of 10.2% over the last 12 months. The local index for all items less food and energy had increased 8.8%. We have not updated any of our forecasts for these changes at this time. The numbers that you're seeing in your forecast do represent the 9.6. The COLA adjustments for the program allocations, the cost of living adjustments, we calculated an average of 5.2%, which ranged between 1% and 9.6% for eligible programs. Based on our calculations, we have about 81 programs that would meet that eligible program criteria. We looked at all program personnel costs and operating costs. We felt like we needed to divide it up between those two areas as opposed to just taking a flat percentage of the allocation. And we provided for adjustments for all agencies at 9.6% for their non-personnel budgets. We maintained or allocated a 3% increase for personnel costs for the 21 workforce stabilization agencies that you just approved their increase for. We felt like they would get a 3% on their salaries and benefits for that going forward for fiscal '23. And for the additional increases to personnel budgets for the remaining workforce stabilization agencies who are yet to propose that, we will be factoring that into that process when we go through looking at their budgets with what they submit to us. In the workforce stabilization, again, you approved this morning earlier a portion of that that's going to be the budget amendment for fiscal '22. We have budgeted for fiscal '23 $4.4 million in regards to those items. The capital RFA request for award, that has been budgeted at $1.75 million. Our future programming, that's another key area that we look at. We have budgeted $7.9 million, which includes $6.5 million for the LOIs, or the letters of intent, and another $1.4 million for other identified programs that we have gone through and looked at throughout JWB. In addition to that, we have budgeted additional staff, 5 full-time equivalents, for an estimated cost of approximately $488,000. These additional FTEs would include a program consultant. Our current program consultants average about 24 programs that they're responsible for. We have suggested another program evaluator. The program evaluators currently are reviewing and maintaining 17 programs per PE, or program evaluator. We would like to add a program financial analyst, or FA. The FAs currently average about 25 programs that they're responsible for relative to budgets, budget amendments, and changes throughout the year. We would also like to see an additional person in the procurement department and then one other additional person in the information technology or the IT department. This is a combination of meeting existing needs within our organization and anticipatory for the new LOIs, letters of intent that are coming out soon, and the workforce stabilization enhancements. This most likely forecast would allow us to spend down our reserves with quality programs aligned with our strategic plan, where at the end of fiscal '27, which is how far we've projected out, we would have an 11% reserve, which is just over our target of 8.3%. And at this time, I would love to have some discussion. I'd like to hear from you on areas of concern and discussions and entertain. Any questions?
Any questions? Yes?
No, can't tell it's on. I gotta look in there and see it. I know there's been discussions in the past about reducing the millage rate. I think that we're in an area right now that we're uncertain what's getting ready to happen here in the future. We're getting close to that bubble that we were at back in 2008. I don't think we'll see that, my personal opinion, I don't think we see that same exact crash, but I think we're going to see something happen. The market has to adjust at some point. Inflation is running up high. We're having staffing issues across the country, employment issues. The cost of living is going up, through the roof. It just, everything is matching and aligning with what happened in 2008, and we're getting close to that. I think that we're on target with where we're at right now, and reducing anything we're doing could be crucial and potentially could devastate some of our programs if we reduced what we're doing. I'm full favor of keeping where we're at and moving forward at this point until we see what happens with the economy, with the market, with the marketplace, because there's just too many uncertainties right now for us to try to make a cut. And I'm uncomfortable with that. I would hate to think that we are cutting dollars and in next year or the year after, all of a sudden we have that crash, and now we're cutting programs and we're not touching the children we were touching before. We're touching less children. I mean, as it is, we don't touch every child in Pinellas County. It's almost impossible to do that, but we try hard. And we do a great job of getting out there, but we don't want to reduce what we're doing. And I think that would be very crucial to our statement and our mission, to not look forward and stay and play where we're at, to step back and reduce what we're doing at this point.
Commissioner?
Yeah, I guess I think it's optimistic to project a lower increase in costs for the agencies than we do for ourselves. Difference between 9% or 9.5% for JWB and 5% for the funded agencies is, I think, optimistic.
Yeah, one thing I'd note, because we absolutely looked at those together and anticipated exactly that question, is that we know that that many of our agencies, even if we go to them, as we have over the years and we are this spring, to say, you're having workforce stabilization problems, what can we do relative to the programs we fund to help you get where you need to go to be able to fully deliver the programs that we're funding? And for many of the organizations, they believe they needed to increase salary costs, and our dollars could help them do that. However, there are other organizations where we only fund 10% or 20% or some smaller percentage of everything that they do. So they have personnel in exactly the same pay grade or pay class or whatever that are funded by us, but also funded through other sources or even earned revenue. They can't afford to increase them all across the board because we're only funding our piece, and they don't have funding for those. They don't believe that's sustainable, or organizationally they can't be increasing these folks and not those, and that's the agency's decision. And therefore, we don't budget for the full 9.6% for those agencies. And so that is a big part of sort of why the average of 5.4% is there, as opposed to, you know, what we're looking at as, at that moment, you know, when we printed these, the, what we believe to be the right COLA or, you know, or increase based on cost of living.
I understand that dynamic, you know, having run programs with several funding sources, but it's also not sustainable for them to have not enough money to make those increases to hire staff like we were talking about. So, you know, if there are other ways we can help them, that would be great. I understand we're funding salaries and they can't afford to increase the salaries, but they're going to have to pay those costs anyway from somewhere. So we're adding to that deficit, if you will. So.
Yeah, and if we can figure out ways to get there, or you have other suggestions on how to get, we really do want to do that. We just haven't found the magic formula and the way to do it.
I think it's a valid question and it needs to be reviewed, and that's what this discussion is all about. Staying in line with some of the thinking that's gone on so far, I've been following the real estate markets, looking at seeing what impacts that are out there. There have been articles about the fact that sellers are now beginning to readjust their expectations on what they could actually get, which takes us back to the 2008 timeframe. Not as dramatic as they could be, but they are making some adjustments. My other biggest concern as we look through this is, you know, sustainability is one thing, finding the right people to fill these roles is another. And then unfortunately, what we're seeing is there's a lot of opportunities out there, but not a lot of takers to jump in and to support this. So the request for adding people is extremely important because we'll need them. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to get them. And that's across all agencies. And that's, in my mind, that's the biggest concern that we have to really address and to find how do we find those right people to fill the roles. Our staff is from everything we can see, is extended. At the same token, Beth and I have spoken, and the team is really taking a good hard look at how they can streamline some of the processes, how they can focus in on making the processes more simple. Sometimes government processes tend to be a little more complex. We had a little joke about that discussion because, you know, again, my background was looking at, in my businesses, where to look at streamlining businesses. Beth reminded me that, you know, when I worked with the post office, I didn't do very well because I didn't listen.
Now, what I said was, you were fine, but they didn't listen. Yeah.
And we can see what's happened. But clearly, there's an opportunity to potentially bring in a consultant. There is costs associated with that, upfront costs when you bring in consultants to help you do that, although the expectation is that they'll pay for themselves and add more value. I think it's important that we look at that and that we really take a good hard look at how do we streamline, try to alleviate some of this while we're going to, you know, struggle to find the right employees. So I think we have to take all that into consideration. We have to think about all the potential elements. And although I think we've all been very open to looking at how do we reduce the impact, we never took into consideration the current situations that we're dealing with, inflation and cost of living and the like. So I think this discussion is great. I believe that it's, again, only the beginning. We've got a Finance Committee coming up. If there are any other questions or comments, please get those to Beth and team, and hopefully the Finance Committee will be able to address those in the upcoming meeting. Mr. Butler, did you have a comment or question? Or, I'm sorry, Mr. Bartlett did. I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
So, you know, we are in unprecedented times. I really don't think we can look at an analysis comparing it to 2008 because it's a whole different economic environment. That was as a result of the mortgages, and I just don't see that happening in this particular picture. We're having people coming from outside who are just throwing down cash, which is turning the whole market topsy-turvy. I hope it ends soon. I'm not terribly optimistic about that, but we will see. My concern is The revenue last year, Laura, how much did that go up as a result of the increase of property values? You know that off the top of your head?
We had 782 was the budget for amended for 21, and the actual was 795.
So, I mean, a figure of from what we made last year in revenue and property taxes to what we made this year, or last year versus the year previous.
Sorry.
Do we know that? But there's no it's going up. The property
Yeah,
values are not
correct.
going to drop next week.
Correct.
You know, and they're not going to drop next year. It's going to take time. If you look at the timeline you guys provided, it goes from 2006 to 2014, it goes like this. And we adjusted the millage rate depending on the changes in the environment.
Correct.
I think, I mean, we're flush. We're going to have to operate within a reasonable budget. If we do go into a recession, which I think we probably are going to have some sorts of a recession, we're going to have to stay within certain boundaries. Everybody has to cut back in a recession. We just can't keep banging the taxpayers to keep us going and adding all these programs. So we have to have some contraction, I think, as we go, which seems to be reflected in the numbers from the historical perspective back here. So I mean, we're doing good things for the community, and it's all good. I don't want to put that aside at all. But I think we have to, based on our financial capabilities, keeping in mind what's going on in the communities to the other people who are paying these bills, I think we have to kind of be a little bit realistic in our perspectives. Sarah and I are struggling. We can't get people. Every lawyer sees it disappeared. There was one under every rock for a while, and now you can't find them. You can't buy them. But we don't have the resources to just keep paying and paying and paying to bring them to us. We have to operate within the boundaries that were provided. And I kind of feel that same way with what we're doing. We can't give everybody all these heavy costs of livings if the rest of the business world and all that is not capable of doing that by taxing people to get the money to do that. Now, you know, that being said, again, I don't want to diminish from what were good things we're doing, but I think we kind of got to keep a perspective of how it affects. And in this timeline, which I was not part of, by the way, but it appears you guys readjusted the millage rate. And as we got new news about what the economic forecast was, because I just can't trust anything right now as to where we're going to be next year or the year after, because everything we've seen you never thought would happen. But we adjusted and then readjusted. And then people don't like when you raise taxes, but you know, if you lower them for a while and then you have to go back to where you were, I think that's a little more understandable. But that's just my 2 cents worth.
No, I understand, and we did take a look at, we had proposed to the Finance Committee to keep the millage rate as is, but we did take a look at knowing, just as you're saying, keeping the millage rate the same, but property assessed values go up, that's a tax increase. I mean, that's basically
Right.
what you're saying. So if you were to reduce the millage to either a rollback amount or some reduction, you know, we've tried to crunch some numbers to see what that impact would be to determine if we could maintain the expenses on what we've budgeted and what would that affect on the top line. The only caution I would have when you do reduce the millage rate is, you know, when you reduce, it's always hard to move it back up, but, you know, that's here or there. And I wasn't here either when they went through this process of changing it and then bringing it up and back and forth. But, and that's why we're here today. I want to hear from you all to say if that's something you want us to calculate and bring to the Finance Committee. I would really like to hear that now because the Finance Committee is April 28th, and we have to send out the allocation contracts on May 2nd. So it's not going to give me a lot of time from April 28th to crunch additional numbers. So if there's numbers I need to crunch, I want to do it now before I go before the Finance Committee.
One of the things that I think I hear as an assumption we may want to, you know, run a scenario on is as opposed to property values going down in the same way that they did in the last recession, which was a very property-driven recession, to perhaps something with property values being flat, which is perhaps more realistic to happen within a recession we might in fact experience. And that's, I'm not saying I know anything about what they're really going to do, but I would say that that will have much less negative impact on our budget than would the negative you know, the losses in value on property that in fact we put in our worst case. Because part of what I'm hearing is, you don't really think the worst case is going to be the same worst case as it was in 2008?
No.
Yeah.
But then what do I know? I mean, I'm just one person, and I'm not sure. I mean, it's like playing card, you know, it's a gamble. Where are we going next?
Yeah, I think just one thing, and then Ms. Ralston, but just one thing I'd like to, because it stays within the discussion that we're having. I think it's important that we ask the staff to take a look at the programs that we have and what the impacts would be and whether we adjust, if we adjust or not. The important part is that we have to be focused in on the value add that we provide for those children in our community. What is it that we need to do? Understanding the impacts of taxation on the general public. I'm a proponent, or I'm someone who believes that when you bring it down and take it away, it's harder to bring it back up. At the same token, we don't want to overburden if the programs don't require it. And I think we really need to take a look at program by program by program and to ensure that we're providing the highest level of value. And if there are any areas in which we aren't doing as well, or the programs aren't at the level they need to be, what do we need to do for that? And if so, is that a reduction? Is there a potential reduction in the spending for that program? I think we need to take a look at all those pieces and understand what impacts there will be in either case or whatever decision we're going to make. Ms. Ralston?
Yeah, I had some extensive phone conversations with Laura Brock and Beth Houghton this week about these topics. And I think there's a couple of things that I'd like to address. And one of them, the millage rate for 2023, I know as a board, we talked about it last year. I think it's an uncertain time, as we're all acknowledging, paper this morning. I think it may not be the year to make that reduction and make an assessment on what happens in the next year, 15 months. And so I would say maybe this is the time to hold firm, but to obviously keep all options open for future years based on what's going to happen with property values. The other thing, because I was involved with the strategic plan, and because I was chair when we lived through COVID, I think the frustration was it seemed like we were surviving a little bit with COVID and helping our programs just keep their head above water. And now, given this budget, and it took me a while to get there, is that we are a bit aggressive in this budget for 23 with the workforce stabilization with COLA. And all through COVID, that's what we were hearing. And then when everybody went back to work, we're still hearing recruitment, retention, particularly in the nonprofit sector. So I want to acknowledge, of course, what Mr. Bartlett said. In other sectors, they have their own issues. But in our sector, it's becoming an increasing problem across the board for nonprofit social services. And so if we are to continue to maintain our relationship with the citizens of Pinellas County, I believe, this is just me, of course, that for 2023, we need to maintain this bit of an aggressive budget, services, new programming, and focus on that strategic plan and go a little bit of a full bore up and leave that millage rate flat. And so for me, it took me a long time to get there, as Laura will know. I questioned and questioned and questioned, very much like Mr. Bartlett did today with workforce development, with COLAs. But after some conversation and re-looking at all these numbers, I am very much endorsing keeping that millage rate for 2023 and bring it back at a later time.
I just want to add on that, that I kind of left off too, is that workforce stabilization in our own organization is really important. If you look across the state of Florida, the other children's services, and compare those salaries, we're a little low. We need to get ourselves up there because we know that we potentially will lose people to those other services because they're all looking too. So everybody's shorthanded. So everybody's looking. And that's really important that we take a hard look at that and make sure we're maintaining that level. So because we have a tremendous staff now. I think every person in this staff does an awesome job that works for JWB. I witnessed 3 of them just last week on a Tuesday night. Given a presentation, they are phenomenal. They do a phenomenal job. And we don't want to lose those people we have. As we see, we're still needing more people, but we need to maintain what we have at the same time.
Not seeing any other questions or comments. I really do appreciate all the messages of input, I should say, to the Finance Committee. Let's ask them to take it back and be prepared to review this in more depth during the Finance Committee and then bringing it back to the board for our final review. So again, thank you, everyone. If you have any other comments or questions, please get them to Laura and team, and hopefully prior to the upcoming Finance Committee meeting. Let's move on to presentations. JWB out of school time, community out of school time, and the Promise Time programs. Julie?
Good morning, everybody. So I'm here to talk to you today about our out-of-school time programs and give you an update on their status. Next slide, please. So first, what is an out-of-school time program? These programs are typically serving participants in the before-school and after-school hours, and they're designed to provide a safe and stable location for students when they may not be able to receive care other places. So these programs are going to be offering them homework help, give them a place where they can socialize with their friends, build their social emotional skills, and receive any kind of academic supports that they may need. So they're able to do this through quality programming, and we know that quality programming is going to have positive outcomes for these youth. But what is going to be included in a quality out-of-school time program? It's going to have 4 separate components. The first is engagement with youth and families themselves. So family engagement is really going to look like family dinner nights or game nights. It's really going to bring the families in and connect them with the programs and the students themselves. And we know that when families are more engaged with students, feel more supported and tend to have more positive outcomes. And these programs are also going to be offered year-round, so during the school time and summer, so that these families know that there's a consistent place where students can go and have this support. The second component of these programs is going to be intentional programming. So they're going to include lesson plans, they're going to include academic supports, and then they're going to include social emotional learning programs. So the academic supports are really going to look like homework help, but a lot of these programs are also going to include certified teachers to help with tutoring or more in-depth person-on-person supports when necessary for that student. And then for the social emotional activities, these are designed to build students' leadership skills, character traits, and focus on positive conflict resolution. So instead of getting into an argument with someone, how can we positively have disagreements but still move on? And these are all going to be incorporated in their daily lesson plans. The third area is going to be these broad enrichment opportunities. And these are going to be determined by capturing student voice. So the student voice is going to help provide the programs with input about what the students are interested in and things like that. And we'll definitely talk about student voice a little bit more later on in this presentation. It's also going to include exposure trips. So these are going to be field trips that are more educational and things like that. I do want to note that during fiscal year 21, exposure trips were largely unsupported by JWB due to the COVID-19 pandemic and it potentially being unsafe for students to be out in the community. So these were not necessarily uniformly implemented across all of these programs. But if they were implemented, they were typically
be implemented through other sources of revenue. And then they're also going to include disguised learning activities. So these are going to be implemented through overlay providers. So that is going to be someone who's going to come into the program either one time or for a short series. And the students are going to learn something in a fun and engaging way. So think of your robotics programs, or when you were in school and someone came in with reptiles and you got to hold them and play with them. Like, those are the disguised learning activities that these programs are implementing. And then the last component of a quality out-of-school time program is strong organizational infrastructure. So without this, you can't implement the prior three areas. So what this is going to look like is low staff-to-student ratios, trained and qualified staff, and then ensuring that those staff are mentoring our students. So most of our programs aim to have a staff-to-student ratio of 1 to 15. And then with our trained staff, as we've discussed a number of times this morning, during fiscal year 21, there was a lot of staff turnover, so having that stable staff was definitely a challenge, which led to potentially higher ratios and potentially changes in the programming. Next slide, please. So in this area, we're talking about 3 separate types of programming. The first is going to be our community out-of-school time programs. These are going to be based in 23 sites, community-based sites throughout the county. And these were able to serve approximately 1,600 students with $4 million. These are going to include programs like PAL, Arts for Life, and Cops and Kids. The second category is our middle school academies. These are going to be based in 11 different middle schools throughout the county. It's going to include programs such as our club, Boys and Girls Club, and our 2 YMCA programs. And they were provided with $2.8 million, and they served 913 students. The last category in this area is our Promise Time and Summer Bridge programs. These programs are based in Title I elementary schools. There's 42 sites throughout the entire county, and these programs really target students that are at a level 1 or a level 2, or within the lowest 35th percentile at schools. So these are our struggling students that they're aiming to interact with. So we provided them with $3.5 million over the last year, and they were able to serve about 5,000 students. Now, that number is going to be different between the school year and summer, and there is some overlap between the students that were served during both time periods. So overall, this portfolio provided a little over $14 million and was able to serve almost 7,700 students. So when we're talking about these participants, what do they look like? We have an even split between female and male students, and the majority of them are living in low to very low COI areas. Now, you've heard a lot about our Child Opportunity Index areas previously, so I'm not going to go into detail about what that is. Just know that the majority of our participants are falling within those areas. We're also seeing that 43% of this population is identifying as Black or African American, 40% is identifying as white, and another 16% is identifying as Hispanic. These programs are also very largely concentrated in the elementary school time period. And this is most likely due to our Promise Time and Summer Bridge locations, which, as I said, are based in Title I elementary schools. But overall, our out-of-school time programs do serve students in K through 12. But as we see, as students get older and parents become more comfortable with having kids stay at home by themselves for a few hours after school, you'll really see a trickle down and fewer numbers of students as grades go up and as kids get older. So it's not a surprise that the majority of our students are being served in the elementary school area. And before we move on to results that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be looking at attendance, discipline, MAP, and then later on student voice. So for school attendance and school discipline, these are the participants that we're talking about, these 7,600 participants. When we get to MAP, we're going to be looking at a special population, and I'll talk a little bit more about that population when we get there. But for right now, the sample population is going to be these 7,600 students.
Joanne, can you remind us what MAP is? Not necessarily what
Yes.
it stands for, but what it is.
Sure. MAP is the academic assessment tests that we use with the school system. They've instructed us that these are the most appropriate academic assessment tests. So that's what we're going to be discussing. You heard a little bit more about them last month when Patrick was discussing the literacy programs. Okay. So first, we're going to talk and take a look at school attendance. So we know that if students are not attending school, that they're going to have more struggles academically simply because they're not actually there to learn. So Pinellas County Schools has an indicator that they look at for 10% of students or 10% of absences. So in a 180-day school year, that's going to be about 18 absences is where the cutoff is that the Pinellas County School starts looking at to see if these kids are struggling and things like that. So we've decided to look at that same measurement benchmark. So what we're seeing for our participants is that absences ranged from 0 to 82, which I know is a lot. However, 89% of our participants had less than 10% of missed school days. So what that means is that the majority of our participants are not hitting that benchmark with school. And then what we are seeing is that the average number of absences is around 8. So when we're looking at this, what we really wanted to understand is why are students being absent? Why are they missing school? So we have been able to determine that 26% of absences were identified as an excused absence. Excused absences are defined by the school system. These are going to include medical absences because you're sick or family events, things like that. And a lot of the absences that we do see in the system actually don't have a reason attached to it, so we don't know if they're excused or not. So it does seem low that it was excused, but that's because we just don't have a reason for the majority of absences. Getting a reason for an absence is definitely a challenging thing for school administration, so we do see that being a little bit lower. However, when we do look at the reasons and the causes, what we're finding is that 92% of excused absences in the last school year were due to either a medical reason or COVID quarantine, which is really a big point here. As we know, COVID had a big impact on the last school year, and PCS is reporting that absences has increased across the board, and a lot of this is due to that COVID quarantine. So if you were sitting next to a participant who may have come in contact, you were required to go home. So having COVID quarantine being as a very large percentage of these excused absences is why students have been missing school. The next area that we're going to look at is school discipline. So we look at two areas here. The first is school referrals. So this is going to be only for our elementary school participants, which as a reminder is 84% of our population. And we're looking to see a benchmark of who had no more than one referral. And for our sample, that is 98% of all elementary school students. So what we do know is that the students are behaving in school. Only 206 had at least one referral, and for those that did have a referral, the average number was 2. So it's still very low, even when they are interacting with school. Yes.
I'm assuming, as I'm raising kids, that referral means you need to go to the principal's office?
Yes, ma'am.
In an elementary school?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, so the second area that we look at is suspensions. So we only look at this for our middle and our high school students, and this is including both in-school and out-of-school suspensions. And we have that same kind of benchmark. How many, what percentage is having no more than one suspension? And 93% of our participants have no more than one. There was 222 that had at least one, and the average number was 2. Next slide, please. Yes.
7,700 kids total, but how many were middle school and high school?
So 84% was elementary
Elementary.
school. Yeah.
Right. So when we're talking about total participants with at least one, that's the total participants of just middle school and high school.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I keep looking at the slide with the participant grade levels. And elementary is really 74%, not 84. It's making me crazy.
Did I say it wrong? I'm sorry if I said that wrong.
No, what it says 84. So.
Okay. Okay. All right. As we go into talking about our MAP data, again, this is our academic assessment data. And we wanted to take a look at a special population for this so that we could have a true cohort. So what that means is that we have been told by Pinellas County Schools that measuring winter to winter is the most appropriate measure to understand growth within the system or academic growth. So in order to do that, we needed to have a smaller sample. So in addition, we're also able to compare this to Pinellas County Schools, and we're comparing to Pinellas County Schools Title I only students. So what we see in grades, we're only going to be looking at grades 3, 4, and 5 for this, and that is because those are the students that have both tests. We see for JWB students, 39% of our students, so the majority of our students are in grades 3, and it slowly trickles down as we get into grades 4 and 5. And this mimics, as I was discussing earlier, as students go in older grades, they're less likely to attend our programs. While for PCS, you kind of see more of an even spread across the 3 systems, or the 3 grades, excuse me. And that's because we're looking at them being in school, so they're not in our programs, which is going to serve less people over time. Next slide, please. So as we know, JWB really aims to reach the students who are most in need of our services. So you can see here that approximately 72% of our students are qualified for free and reduced lunch, with another 17% of students being identified as having an exceptionality. And when we're looking at PCS Title I students, we see that this is a very good comparison for the JWB group. They're very similar in terms of free and reduced lunch and exceptionality, which means that it is a good comparison sample. So as we're starting to look into the results of this data and the results of MAP scores, I want to keep some things in mind when looking at those. The first is going to be the impact of COVID. So during this time period, we know that out-of-school time kids were sick and having to meet quarantine issues, so they were not necessarily in school. Some kids attended school virtually. So this is all going to play factors into their academic success. The second is that we're really looking at MAP data kind of for the first time. We're really starting to dive into this data set and working with the school system to understand the implications of what we're seeing. So we have not been able to trend this data yet. So as we know, this is going to be a point in time. So we don't know if these results are just due to COVID, just due to the current circumstances, or if it's going to be a true impact of these programs. The third thing that are going to highly affect these results, and as we've talked about kind of all morning, is that staff turnover. And for these programs, we've definitely seen a lot of turnover, very specifically in the academic support areas. It's been very challenging getting certified teachers into these programs. And with smaller staff and higher ratios, students may not be getting the same types of services that they would have been getting had they been fully staffed. So these are definitely things to be considering as we're looking at these results. So we're going to start looking at winter of 2020 in terms of map reading. So as we go into the map, we are going to look at both reading and math. We're just going to start with reading for right now. So this is going to be looking at projected proficiency. So this is going to tell us for students who took the test in the winter of 2020, what percentage are going to be proficient and at grade level at the time of taking the FSA, or the Florida Standard Assessment Test. So what we're seeing, proficiency is identified as a level 3 or higher, so the blue area of this chart. So what we're seeing is that 38% of JWB students are projected to be proficient, as compared to 41% of PCS students. So we do see similarities between the two groups. So again, in working with PCS, we do know that the winter to winter time period is going to be the most appropriate test. And we're seeing, we're looking here at those that met their projected growth. So what percent met their projected growth for this time period? So we see that 48% of JWB students met that projected growth as compared to 52% of PCS students. Here we're looking at the projected proficiency across the two tests and what percentage is going to meet that proficient level. And what we're really seeing is that neither JWB students nor PCS student had a really significant change between these two different testing periods. And what we need to consider here is that what we are seeing is that our students are fighting off regression. So they're not moving backwards, which is a good thing. Especially given all of the various context that's going on during this time period. And these are points that we are going to continue to monitor over time, but the point here is that our students are not regressing. So the next area that we're going to look at is map proficiency. So the charts and the kind of caveats that I just outlined with reading are going to be the same. So we're looking at the winter of 2020, we're looking at a level 3 or higher, and what we're seeing is that 39% of JWB participants were projected to be proficient as compared to 38% of PCS students. So in terms of what percent met their projected growth? Again, for math, we're very similar to PCS, with 64% of JWB students meeting that projected growth as compared to 65% of PCS students. And then again here, across the two testing periods, JWB and PCS are very similar, and there's not a demonstrable growth or significant change between the two testing periods. But again, we prevented regression, and I think that is the key takeaway here. So while we may not be seeing a large shift in the data and a large shift in how our participants are performing, we need to take into account the outside factors that are potentially out of our control that can have an impact on these results. So that's going to be students missing school because of quarantine issues, potential programmatic changes, lack of program supports, things like that. So we are going to continue paying attention to these areas moving forward and really understand what necessary supports are needed for these students as we go forward. So as I mentioned earlier, participant voice is very important to our students. So again, I'm going to shift our sample a little bit again. So we're no longer talking about our academic success of these students, but we're going to be looking at students in the program and really assessing what their aspect and their intentions and their feelings about the programs are. So once a year, we survey participants in our community out-of-school time programs and our middle school academy programs to understand this aspect. Students, in order to be assessed, need to be in grades 3 and higher. They need to have participated in the program for at least 6 months and active during the administration period. And we said this so that we get the best results and the best understanding from our students on this survey. The survey looks at 4 separate areas. It's going to look at that program engagement. It's going to look at conflict resolution, which is really that building of their social emotional skills. And then we added 2 areas this year to really have a stronger understanding of the effects of COVID on these participants. So we looked at the negative effects of COVID, and we also looked at program support. So when you're looking at this chart, what we want to see for the first 3 areas, so the programmatic engagement, conflict resolution, and program support, we want to see high agreement. So you want to see more information and more positive results on the blue side of the chart. For the negative effects on COVID, you want to see more disagreement. So you want to see more on the gray side of the chart. And that's exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing that the programs had strong engagement from the students. And kids like going to these programs. They have fun there. They feel supported by the staff. They're also reporting to us that these programs are helping them with their conflict resolution skills. They're helping learn that social emotional aspect in dealing with relationships. And then I'm going to skip to the negative effects of COVID before talking about program support. So this area, what we really asked about is what COVID had, the impact of COVID on their lives. Were they feeling more disconnected? Were they feeling more lonely? Were they feeling more scared? And then very specifically, we also asked, are they having struggles paying attention in school? And if COVID had a negative effect on their ability to learn. And while we do have strong disagreement in this area, 34% of our students did have a positive agreement, which means that they did experience some negative effects of COVID. The positive message here and the positive thing that we need to note is that while these 34% of students did have a negative effect, they felt very supported by these programs. The programs helped reduce their feelings of loneliness, help them reduce their fears, help them reduce those that disconnection, help them learn better in school. So they did have those negative effects, but we had a mitigating factor through these programs involved there. So what we really need to talk about is what is the purpose of these programs and what are the majority of them doing? So they're largely not intervention programs. As I said at the beginning, they're there to provide a safe and stable environment for these kids. And what we're really not capturing in the results that I just presented to you is the true impact these programs are having on building these students' social emotional skills. So this is an area that we do want to build into, and we had put together a small internal working group to really look into this area to see how we can measure this better. But what we heard from the programs is that due to the fluctuations in their staffing and the workforce stabilization not necessarily being there, that looking at social emotional is maybe not be the perfect time. So we need to stabilize the workforce first, get kids attending the program, and then we can really start looking at their social emotional skills. So I just want to close out kind of on that same note with a quote from one of the parents of our programs. She says that her daughter Esme loves her after-school program, that they want to keep her there as long as possible, and it is really due to the staff and the staff caring about those students that are keeping the kids there and what's really mattering here. So I want to leave it there. Thank you for your time, and I am open for any questions.
Susan, do you?
Yeah, thank you. Excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. Last comment you made was wanting to add social emotional measurement to the out-of-school time programs. I think that's good, but my question is, Would it be in place of or in addition to?
In addition to.
Thank you.
Joanne, thank you so much. That was a great presentation. We really appreciate all the hard work and effort that's been put into this. Let's now move on to the legislative report presentation. Becca, this is your first actual presentation to the group, although you are well-known and you're, and I should leave it at that. You are well-known across the board by all across the state, so.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. I will be brief, and brevity is not usually my space, but my respect for your time is greater than that. This is going to be the legislative recap, and as we move forward to the next slide, I want to welcome you to our Capitol journey. I love this photo, and it is ours. So as we lead through that, let's talk about what we're going to do today. On the next slide, this is my goals for the next few minutes. I want to talk about what I have great gratitude for, which has made our successes possible. I want to talk about where we started and the excellent work that my predecessor did with y'all in creating our consensus platform. And let's see what we've gotten done since there. We're going to give some really strong shout outs for some outstanding legislative superstars and some pieces that we are very excited about its impact on the children that we serve in our community at large. We're going to hit on a couple legislation of note and send our love to our fine governor and hope that the pen goes to paper on those guys. And then we really want to talk about the historic, in my brief tenure, level of engagement at every, from the round this board table, which is to be commended, but I have received so much support, which has enabled me to be successful in every team in this organization. And I'll explain how it's really, really exceptional. And we're going to talk about some of our affinity, and then I am yours for the questioning. But yes, and I did choose to plagiarize Dr. Seuss with "Oh, the Places We Shall Go," which we will talk about now. All right, first, Shannon, hit me with the next one, if you'd be so kind. This is probably familiar to most of y'all. This is, again, the excellent work of Deb Pruitt and company. I have bolded the areas in which there has been some significant growth through the legislative process this year, and we say thank you, Florida Legislature, for your work. It also means we have great opportunities still before us, and that will keep us busy and moving onwards, and I say hooray to that. Hit me, Shannon. All right. I have decided to take liberties with SB 7034, which our governor signed this week. Thank you, sir. That I'm referring to as the Putting Kids First is both to market our signature program, but also that really does encapsulate the work of this piece of legislation. This is one of the cleanest pieces of legislation I've ever had the privilege of reviewing. It addresses a problem. It's trauma-informed, and it puts kids first. And for that, I say amen. So I commend our legislature for that. I also have to say, as I've spent my time learning about the excellence that happens in this building and around this table, this is also in lockstep with the work and the decisions that have been made in this room and by our different leadership teams that our folks oversee. And so I wanted to show not only where the legislature wants us to go on behalf of children, but where we already are and how we are in lockstep and furthermore in a position to be a truly strategic ally for our elected leaders at every level of government. Case in point, the Juvenile Welfare Board is currently funding the Children's Home Network, their local kinship program, at just upwards of $1 million. That is fantastic. Beth and everybody else that has had the opportunity has been working very closely with FSS to make a very smooth transition. Everyone in this room knows that is not a small lift, but it has been done with a level of grace and excellence that I think everyone is very proud of. I had the privilege of being in a meeting in Hillsborough last night and spoke with one of the folks from the Children's Board, and they commended Circuit 6 as a gold standard for implementation. So thank you all. We're looking good across the bay and across the state. This piece of legislation also beautifully aligns with all of our strategic result areas, which again, of course, is very important. Any questions about this before we move onwards? All right, moving on smartly. Our next piece of legislation is what I'm referring to as the focus on family, fatherhood, and the future of our youth. The Fatherhood Initiative really does carve out some understanding for the need for children to have responsible fathers in their lives. Both of these pieces of legislation were the priorities of our speaker, who we are privileged to have, and our own delegation, and our close neighbor, the Senate President. What's wonderful about this piece is, again, it is a good piece of legislation that addresses an issue. Clean, beautiful, smart, fiscally responsible, all the things we wanted to see. And I am proud to say, as I continue to become a student of the Juvenile Welfare Board, that we have been in this space now for 4 years, beginning in fiscal year 19. We have created a county-wide collective. There is fatherhood support. And even more so, in the last year, prior to knowing this legislation would exist, the brilliant folks who put together those numbers have more than doubled our investment in it. So I, again, applaud the knowledge that sits around this table and in the different teams that have made this possible to anticipate the needs of the children. And of course, JWB is in a position to assist our Pinellas County agencies to apply for, implement, and to help put this great legislation into the lives of children, which is what we want to do. And again, I've outlined our school readiness and result areas that are applicable. But what I really need to say is what is really exceptional and where any success I have been privileged to have in my 5 months of since I stood here the first time is I set out a goal that I want our elected officials at every level of government, because they are all critical to a collective and a collaborative environment to meet the needs of children, to feel that they can call any of us, and namely, it will be my job to take that call. And I've seen that happen already, and I take that with a great point of pride, because earning the trust of people who are time-pressed is a gift. And when this was being announced, I received a phone call from one of our members of the delegation, and they wanted to know what had JWB done. Well, at about 3 months on the game, I can't tell you I could have recited it with a lot of grace. But what I can tell you is within a matter of moments, I asked Karen Bogus. She put me in touch with Jen Arteaga, who is our fatherhood expert. I went to fatherhood camp like you wouldn't believe, and I was able to turn around some of the best practices, data-informed information, and of course, as April always does, the brilliant points of reference and talking points that are on our website. Furthermore, not just internally, but our external excellence, and I appreciate you all for making me look good in this scenario. I had the divine Chief Milliken, who has been my adopted board member without his permission, but I have claimed him. He was legitimately taking JWB materials and handing them to members of our delegation. And if that's not a best practice on serving our elected officials who have so much to do, our board chair was using his cell phone to be in touch. I had everything I asked for, the answer was yes. And it was in service to our children. And for that, I am here for it all day long. Next slide, ma'am. Here's some nice pieces that we're still waiting on, and I'm putting it out there for good juju that we will have signed soon. One of those is bolded, is the early learning reimbursement formula, an increase that is sorely needed. We also have some great stuff that will speak volumes to to some of the folks here. The juvenile diversion expungement, HB 0195. Also, the non-judicial arrest record of a minor, newborn screenings, all these things that improve the lives of children and help keep them rich with opportunity. And I am a devotee of our Pinellas County Children's Opportunity Index, and I believe it is a prescriptive response to how we will solve problems. And again, expanded mental health licensure, and of course, more creative ways they expanded money towards early childhood music education. But I bookended this slide with two things that I think are important. Number one, honoring our consensus platform and the important work that's done there. We know it needs to be done, but to see it in black and white is exciting. Also, the PIMS appropriation, of which 3 members of our delegation were the sponsors of. And it is a $5 million allocation to build the crisis stabilization unit, which I don't think anyone in here would disagree is not critical. But I had the opportunity to hear from our board members and our CEO as they expressed with such eloquence to our elected officials why it was so important. And it was truly exciting. So I do thank Chairman Latvala, Senator Hooper, and Representative Diamond for sponsoring this. But I equally thank each of you for understanding its importance and working to create that. Moving on smartly. Now let's talk about the family table. What have we done? In the brief legislative session, we received a House tribute from Chairman Latvala. It was also attended by 2 other members of our delegation, Representative Coster and Representative Diamond. We received a Senate resolution, SB 1988, to be clear, not the year I was born, although I know that comes as a surprise, from our friend Senator Roussan. He was joined by Senator Hooper, and we had the privilege of in our presence, the Senate President Simpson. We are delighted to announce and reiterate the consensus platform achievements that we have gotten. But the meetings and the relationships we are continually building with our delegation, and again, at every level of government, because we all know all government is local, has been remarkable. And I'm very, very excited about where we're headed with that. In the coming week, we have presentations for our Pinellas Delegation Chair, Representative DeSigli, as well as Representative Cheney, using the Pinellas County Opportunity Index to create a prescription for how JWB can help them meet the needs of their constituents. There are so many gifts in this building, and my privilege to be able to tell people about them. My father says I have to stop saying this, but I can't believe I get paid to do something that is so close to my heart. And what I have learned, and what I do count as a legislative success, is the remarkable internal capacity to meet these needs. I started writing down all the people, and I ran out of paper and of the individuals in here. I mean, I must start with Linda Leedy, who is not here today, but the opportunities, the trust, and the encouragement she has given me as my supervisor is remarkable. That doesn't happen by accident, and of course, I must yield to Beth, who has done the same. But I have to say, I've learned as much from Barbara and Laura, the ability to work collaboratively, quickly, efficiently, and exceptionally lives in this building. But it doesn't just stop here. And of course, Diana, who is one of the smartest people and always reminds me gently how to do things, because she has every gift that I don't possess. And again, I could go on. Nick, Michael, there's so many. But it's not just internal. As the outward-facing folks, you all have served me with so much kindness, grace. I had the privilege of seeing Miss Malo in the hallways of Tallahassee with love and support. I know our divine Mr. Bartlett was at the Fatherhood Initiative announcement. There was an intersection, and again, We all worked in tandem, and I'm just so proud to have been a part of that with each of you. So any success that we have is an exceptional group effort, and Colleen, of course, kept me in my lane as much as one can, and so I'm grateful for that. But yes, this is, well, let's go to the next slide. Let's do that. Now we're going to go on a little tour du jour of some of the happy faces is celebrating. This is when we received our House tribute. Everyone is happy, and we have several of our delegation in there. And I apologize if these are not perfectly aligned, but I do have copies for folks who want them. All right, Shannon, hit me again. The JWB cookie was well known, and I am very proud of the relationships I built with not only our elected officials, but also the folks in law enforcement and at every level of service within the Capitol. We also have on the floor of the Senate some of our exceptional leadership. And again, it is no small lift to say to you remarkably busy folks, hey, how about in 5 days we all go up and do the next 96 things? But again, the answer was always yes, and what else can I do? Next slide, please. Again, from the floor, when we were being forever immortalized in the records for the state, and are unfortunately not here today. She's probably helping children, Judge Moore, and of course, again, Senator Roussan. Yeah. This is, we're in Chairman Latvala's office. There was a lot of conversation and gratitude for the PIMS, the understanding of the need of the PIMS appropriation. And as you can see, there is nothing but joy on the faces because people are just proud and happy to talk about the work we're doing here. And I got to sit in awe and learn and get smarter every single day, which was a point of privilege. Hit me again, Shannon. All right. We even recruited a former board member with whom I have a personal affinity for, who has joined us in one of those photographs, the exceptional Judge Raymond Gross. But April is in that photo, and as I have said on repeat, April's name comes up in every meeting that I'm in. There is nothing in this operation she does not touch, and I cannot thank her enough for her leadership and support in the past 5 months. And then we have our folks hanging around Senator Roussan's desk. What I want to say, you can go to the next slide. These are the moments. Look at Beth. She looks so happy in all of them. Look at that joy. And that's on very little sleep, and I did not allow people to eat. It was a very, I ran kind of a tough ship, and I appreciate everybody getting on deck with that. But I stood up here 5 months ago, and I said my intent and my belief was that the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County was the gold standard in the work that we do. And that I not only believed that, but I was going to share that information and convey that to our elected officials at every level of government. 5 months later, I've never been more convinced that truer words, bless you, have been spoken. And I am just so honored that we have made progress, that the JWB story and our 75 years has continued to be an encapsulation of courageous leadership. I've never worked with more hardworking, intelligent, committed people who want to create a better future for the children of Pinellas County. And I firmly believe, as a conduit and as a collective, we shall do so. And it is my absolute privilege to have taken a small part in the last 5 months. And my final and very exciting slide reads with, do you have any questions or comments?
As I have a comment, obviously I'm in Tallahassee for most of the session, and I will tell you that Becca did a phenomenal job up there. Every time I saw her, she was hardworking, getting everybody grouped together, grouping our delegation together, grouping other senators and House reps together. So I just want to say thank you. You did a phenomenal job this year. You did a lot of great things for the children in Pinellas County, and thank you.
And with that, I bid you, oh, sorry. I was just trying to respect, and you guys are fancy.
I cannot hold back. Becca is, you've done a phenomenal job in the first 5 months. We didn't know what to expect. We still don't know what to expect. But we're here in support of everything that you're doing. I will tell you this, in my long life on this earth, I have never met anyone who could start a conversation, don't know how the conversation began, with total strangers, but eventually, well, quickly, I should say, lead to the real issues and getting people to talk. I heard her in one conversation comment about a young lady's hair and that she knew exactly what hair dryer she used because she had one in her room as well, which then led to the conversation about why it's so important for the programs that we're doing. Becca, keep up the great work. You're doing a fantastic job. I know your father's proud of you. He walked down the street and could do nothing but smile from ear to ear with his just overjoy of the work that you're doing. So please keep up the great work, and thank you for all you're doing.
Again, it's my absolute pleasure, and I thank Beth very much for this opportunity, and the rest of you. I can't wait to see what we do next.
I'm not letting you leave until
Oh.
I say something about PEMS.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
That has been, I was a Baker Act attorney back in 2008. I have been in the PEMS facility for decades now. That has been something that has been very near and dear to my heart as the Baker Act attorney, and I am so excited and pleased with the work on your behalf and on the board's behalf of making some progress and moving the needle on that. That is something that has been desperately needed for a very long time, and I'm so excited to see progress. So thank you all for whatever contributions you made to that effort.
Yeah, we slipped in a comment about that need in our community pretty much any time anybody would listen to us. We know it's in the current version of the budget. We'll all wait and see what the governor does.
No, and I appreciate the time that you took to tour Tim.
Right.
PEMS as well. I remember many, it's a long day. We took a lot of time out. A lot of people were involved in looking at that and making progress. So thank you.
But it enabled us, and enabled me to speak with authenticity and firsthand knowledge of why the current facility it does not support what goes on, to say the least.
And now I officially bid you adieu. Thank y'all.
Okay, let's move on to the Chief Executive Officer's report.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to update you on how we're doing on the Family Service Initiative, or FSI's front door shift from the call center 211 to PEMS. To say it has been successful is almost an understatement. By that I mean we fully expected there might be some bumps in the road early on, and that it would take time to get it up and running in a smooth fashion. But frankly, instead, it has exceeded expectations. That is an understatement. To do what they do, assist families with compassion and competence from the first phone call. So some of the very specific things that PEMS implemented are now being sought out by other agencies. So for instance, there is a QR code, which perhaps those of us in our generation don't use actively, but a lot of people do. So there's a QR code that families can use to get directly to PEMS in this front door. There's an online form that is very simple that families can use if they wish, and a significant number have. And the phones are being answered live by a person. And they're not, most calls are about 15 minutes. That's an average, because the person they're talking to, the family's talking to, has a social work background, is immediately cluing in on what are the family's needs. Does this family qualify for the Family Service Initiative? If so, let's get that moving quickly. If not, it's not a, well, so sorry, goodbye. It's rather someone who knows the resources in the community, who can give real, live, helpful referrals to other places and other needs in the community. So as of Friday, April 8th, with just 1 week in this transition that started April 1st, In that week, there were 99 calls. 27 were follow-up or repeat calls. 72 of those 99 were unduplicated. There was a 100% response rate. Every call was answered by a person. There were 61 online forms completed and a 100% response rate to those forms. As has been the case, the kinds of requests that were most predominant were for rent, utility, and food stamp issues. We did get a fair number of folks who called requesting updates or application assistance with the federal money, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what ERAP stands for, but anyway, but it is federal money that is at either the county level or now at the City of St. Pete level, and available to assist with rental, with rent, but there is a process and getting through that process. So one of the things Juvenile Welfare Board did months ago was begin to work with, in this case, the county, so that our folks, so our, I want to say it's Gulf Coast, but one of our navigators could actually look at who was in line waiting for resolution of issues with the county, call those folks and assist them in getting the documentation or scanning a document, whatever it took to get a complete application. We had folks who were already in place, already working with FSI, knew this landscape, but could help navigate and get those folks the support they needed. So obviously, because we don't want to supplant, we wanted to see families, everybody wanted to see families using those federal funds if they qualified before looking, say, to Family Service Initiative, FSI, and our county tax dollars. So PIMS has, what they added in this process was what they are now calling this front door FSI Connect. So they added a supervisor and 2 assessment navigators on board, all backed up with their social workers who are already navigators and were already in place. There's a 3rd position that they're still hiring for. But PIMS cross-trained every one of their system navigators so they could back up on the phone. So that's why you have a 100% response rate. We knew that, and you all reminded us that, how's the community going to know where they should call? How are the agencies going to know? And of course, it'll take a while before everybody who needs to know knows, but we put together, April and others put together a very robust communication strategy. We distributed flyers broadly and to lots of agencies, both in English and Spanish. And then further, we submitted the FSI profile, why to call, when to call, to 211 that keeps both an online and they use on the phones, inventory of programs and who qualifies, and so that was in line. We were meeting weekly, the PIMS, Gulf Coast, and JWB, to walk through any issues, any problems, any suggestions for improvement, and there were small changes made as they went along. The strengths of all of this that frankly exceeded our expectations was that PIMS has a true solution-focused social work approach when they pick up every one of those phone calls. So it's not designed as a call center, which 211 is, but rather it's coming from social work, how do I solve this family's problems quickly so they can move on, so they can get the services they need. And PIMS internally has a lot of other programs and resources that they could immediately connect with the families. So it really has become what we'd always hoped, and that is real-time, flexible, nimble help for families. They even have, a number of things there on site. So if the PIMS location is reasonable for somebody, they could immediately provide diapers, shelf-stable food, household items, clothes, and so on. So some of those happen that quickly. I would just say that PIMS has used technology exceedingly well, both in transferring the data they receive and talking to a family immediately to Gulf Coast online, not So somebody has to re-enter all that data. And they're also using a piece of software to obtain electronic releases of information that allow all of that to happen. Those were the kinds of things, kind of sounds in the weeds, but those are the kinds of things that would slow down actual services being rendered to a family or connecting them with what they really needed. So there are a lot of people within JWB and with PIMS and Gulf Coast who deserve all the credit for making all of this happen. But I think it speaks volumes about a trusting relationship that we started with PIMS. And if it hadn't been for that, and our internal folks doing double back flips to get the budget in place and the contract in place and all the rest, none of this could have happened in a timely way so that April 1st, PIMS was really ready to move. So Janine Evoli is head of our FSI program, obviously on the ground with every piece of this. Linda Leedy was on top of it the whole time, and April and everybody pulled together to make this happen, and the same thing happened with PIMS. So we had just an absolutely amazing event in Tarpon Springs on April 4th for a Youth Suicide Prevention Town Hall. Becca had said, okay, we're in Tallahassee on 2/2, February 2nd, and we received a House proclamation. We were up again on 3/3, and that's when we got the Senate bill that Senator Roussan shepherded. And she said, so what are we going to do on 4/4? Well, on 4/4, April 4th, we had this incredible event in Tarpon Springs around youth suicide. And the biggest comment that came out of that session that was well attended by both youth, providers, parents, and others was that this was real. It was authentic. Mr. McCurrick was there, and I think it backed me up. We really heard the voices of youth, pretty unvarnished and clear, and with youth on a panel who were willing to be open and share what their experiences had been, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and an amazing speaker that we were able to bring, Johnny Crowder, who, as he says, he's 29, so he's kind of like not quite a youth anymore, but he remembers and is able to convey the reality of his teenage years and his near brush with suicide in a way that really would resonate both with the, I'll say, older adults in the room as well as with the kids in the room.
As well. Congressman Bill Arakis.
Oh, and Congressman Bill Arakis was there, which was wonderful. So a courageous panel. I can't say enough about what all of our people did to make this a reality. It was it was a collaborative effort with Zero Suicide Partners of Pinellas that includes a number of the mental health agencies in Pinellas County, as well as the USF College of Public Health. So like most things, we didn't do it on our own, but I would say we were the backbone of making sure it all happened. An amazing, I guess handout would be what you'd say, but small, very readable, bound copy of who to call, what you would need to know, things like youth mental health first aid and so on, that were available to all of those who participated. There were 2 breakout sessions, one with the kids and one with the adults, and each of those went even deeper in expressing the concerns, hearing the concerns, and hearing what it is we could do to be better. So another prevention of youth suicide town hall is being planned for Tuesday, June 14th, and that one will be virtual, so we hope that will be able to touch others who may not be able to come to an event after hours. So again, it was, many of the people there had been to all kinds of seminars and meetings relative to youth suicide, but they had never attended one like that. And I'm just so proud of our folks who put that on. Speaking of being proud, interestingly enough, on March 13th, our board chair, Michael McCurk, was honored by CASA during their annual fundraiser gala as chairman of the Juvenile Welfare Board. And CASA CEO Loriana Forsythe presented him with the Rise of Hope acknowledgement for his leadership as a protector of Pinellas County children. Now, what's most important is you have to see what he received. This is our chair, Mike McCurk, in full Star Wars regalia. That was the theme of their event. Rise of Hope, protector of Pinellas County children. So I would love to represent this to you with a round of applause.
Yeah, if I only looked like this. Many years ago, and I'm not sure where they got the picture, but it was a very, very appreciative, award. And at that event, CASA talked about the things that they're going to be building, the new center, and they raised a tremendous amount of money, over $1 million, in support of that effort. So it shows the community is really behind this, and I was just pleased and surprised to receive such an award. But thanks.
Thank you. Next, I wanted to speak with you about an article that was in the newspaper some days ago, and just say, because I wasn't here during that time period, and some of you were and many of you were not, I had to do a little research, so I looked at some past documents, and I talked to Colleen, who was here at the time, a few other staff folks. And so I just want to share with you my understanding of JWB, its role, and so on. So my understanding is that JWB participated from approximately 2011 to 2015 with several local hospitals in what was known as an intergovernmental transfer in furtherance of the Medicaid buyback program, which was authorized by the Florida legislature in its General Appropriations Act. My understanding is that other local governments throughout the state also participated in this program, which was accomplished via ACA, or the Agency for Healthcare Administration, under which Medicaid falls. JWB participated in this program to maximize revenue to be able to offer more services for kids in Pinellas County. JWB consistently seeks ways to maximize services for children through partnerships and collaboration with other local organizations. So our mission and our purpose was similar to what we do every day. As a government entity, JWB can accept donations, and the donations actually added money to JWB's programming and provided services that we would not have otherwise been able to provide based on ad valorem taxes alone. Donations from hospitals funded qualifying JWB programs, which in turn freed up JWB funds to send to ACA for the Medicaid buyback program for qualifying medical services for children in Pinellas County. JWB's participation in the Medicaid buyback program was done, as always, completely out in the open, thoroughly explained at public board meetings, set forth in the budget, in annual reports, annual audits, and accomplished through ACA, the Agency for Healthcare Administration. The situation changed in approximately 2015, at which time JWB no longer participated. Everything, as I said, was done out in the open and in accordance with our best understanding of applicable law and regulations at that time. JWB is not a party to the lawsuit that's referenced in the newspaper. In fact, was unaware of it until the press release. In June 2017, the U.S. Attorney's Office sent JWB a request for information, which we responded to, and JWB has not been contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office since 2018. So that, I hope, is a good summary for all of you as to what I know and what we know about the program, the arc of what we did. As we've reviewed it, the board that sat at this table was very responsible and asked the kinds of hard questions that you all asked today, and always do. So, one thing I want to pull out that I included in information items that I just think is particularly helpful. JWB has always provided really excellent research information that we share with the broader community. And likewise, the United Way, Suncoast does many of the same things. And we try not to step on it. If they're going to do it, we all share it and back and forth. So the United Way, Suncoast put together this rather amazing housing crisis dashboard that is in your materials. And let me just touch on what it says at the highest level. It reveals that 1 in 2 families in Hillsborough, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota, and DeSoto counties, which is Suncoast region, are rent cost burdened, and I'll define that in a minute. This crisis is being felt across the socioeconomic spectrum, with teachers, healthcare workers, police officers, and other professionals feeling the effects on their household budgets. Economists define rent cost burdened households as those who are spending more than 30% of their monthly income on rent. The statistic represents just one of the indicators of the United Way's data team that they will continue to track in their new State of the Housing Crisis dashboard. And the page also details all of Suncoast's ongoing eviction mitigation efforts. So a copy of that is provided in your board package. This dashboard will be updated periodically, and we will follow that. They obviously underline the need for greater assistance, and I would just say sort of anecdotally, the fear that many of our agencies have relative to this issue when federal dollars are no longer available. The U.S. Census Household Pulse Survey indicates that 40% of Florida respondents feel that they are likely to be evicted from their home in the next 2 months. 40% are afraid they will be evicted in the next 2 months. That's frightening. It's also revealing that the United Way's data team discovered that a 2-earner household, each making $15 an hour, would still be classified as rent burdened and unable to find affordable rental accommodations across our region. And meanwhile, the state minimum wage is actually $10 an hour. United Way Suncoast has devoted $3 million to eviction mitigation efforts across this rather larger geography, including funding the hiring of rental navigators, cohorts of nonprofit agencies, regional planning, and so on. And we are obviously one piece in that continuum of support. Just wanted to highlight, and Laura already touched base, that the British Petroleum or BP settlement money we received and was sort of sitting over in a pocket, but could be spent for any otherwise appropriate JWB expenditure. And so you included that in the funding for our workforce stabilization that we talked about and you approved earlier. Would also want you to know that 18 months ago, give or take, the Juvenile Welfare Board applied for FEMA funds to reimburse us for significant food assistance that we provided nimbly very soon after COVID upended everything in our communities. And while, as we read what FEMA was supposed to be reimbursing, it appeared to us that we were right down the middle of that lane. FEMA denied us once. We appealed once, and they denied it again, and we decided we must not be speaking the same language, so we are not going to go further and appeal that. And then last, on a wonderful note, JWB's 75th Awards Luncheon will be Friday, April 29th. Thank you for already serving as our honorary host committee and hosting and filling tables for that 75th Anniversary Awards Luncheon. Again, that will be April 29th from 11:30 to 1:30. And to recognize both the number of people we expect and hope will be there and the fact that people like to be more socially distanced, we're having this in the St. Pete Coliseum. That's a pretty doggone big venue. So all the planning is in process, and as is often the case, April is at the center of that. And therefore, I know it will be an amazing event. So that's what I had to share with you, but of course, I'm open for any questions.
Any questions?
I just want to comment, Beth. I want to say thank you to you and all the staff that worked hard on converting 201 to PIMS. I know for me, that's exactly what we were looking for. We weren't getting that with 201, and I believe the rest of the board was looking for that as well. You guys did a phenomenal job on that, and how rapidly you put that together, and we're helping the community better than we ever have in the past. So thank you to you and your staff for making that happen.
Ditto. I just think being part of the initial strategic discussions about doing something different because we had to meet the client's needs. I just think it was a great job, and it was a good report today. I do have another item that I would ask. Before too long, could we put together a September calendar? Typically, we do not meet. Typically, we change our September calendar around trim notices that are required of this board, and I think sooner rather than later. When I didn't see it on the agenda, I forgot to mention it. But if we could get that calendar set, I think a lot of people would like to get that September calendar in lock, because it's 2 meetings that month. Well, 3. It's the board meeting, trim notice number 1, and trim number 2. Thank you.
Right, and we try to align one of those trim notices with the board meeting, but still, we will do that. Thank you.
Is it on the May agenda?
It's on the May board agenda, so thank you.
Great. I concur with the comments made about PIMS. It's in my estimation, it was had to be a quick turnaround. It was somewhat difficult to understand whether or not it was going to be able to be met, but you did, and I applaud the team for being able to make that happen. So let's move on then to information items. I think Beth alluded to some. If there's any questions or comments, you can please bring them up. If not, then open agenda. Do we have any comments? Okay. Finally, anniversaries. Mr. Butler.
We have one anniversary this month, and that's Cheryl Miller, 7 years. Congratulations.
Before I adjourn, there's the future meetings are there, but again, before I adjourn, I'd like to make a closing comment and remind everyone of the significant loss to our community that recently had with the loss of Pastor Rainey. His impact, especially in South County, will be missed. Let's keep him and his family in our prayers, and let's keep and continue to keep the work that he had led and participated in support of the children of Pinellas County moving forward. He is a great loss, and we will greatly miss him. With that said, I move to adjourn.
When's your election?
Yeah. We'll see what he says. Yeah, we'll see what he does. We'll see what he does. He's going to go around and walk around people.